All right. And I just have a little thing to welcome everyone. So welcome to our Fall into OBOB 2024 event series. My name is Julie. I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books in Bend, Oregon. As I mentioned, we're recording this. You can turn off your video if you need to, and then we'll have it up on our YouTube channel later this week for you to view or to send to your friends if they couldn't make it tonight. So in the chat, I would love to hear who is doing OBOB for the first year, or if you have done OBOB before, how many years have you been doing it? Since this is one of our 3rd through 5th grade books, we'd love to hear if it's your first time, your third. It's just so exciting to hear how many of you are loving the Oregon Battle of the Books. So as we hear from people, we've got somebody in Cresswell. I love that. I think you know why we're here, but we're going to talk about this fantastic book, which I am currently reading. I will say I didn't finish before tonight, but that's okay. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about the fact that no one can figure out what Gwendolyn Rogers' problem is, not her mom or her teachers or any of the many therapists she's seen. But Gwendolyn knows she doesn't have just one thing wrong with her. She is 54, at least according to a confidential school report that she read, because she is number 16, sneaky, not to mention number 13, impulsive. So Gwendolyn needs a plan, because if she doesn't get these 54 things under control, she's not going to be able to go to horse camp this summer with her half brother, Tyler. But Tyler can't help her because there's only one thing wrong with him, ADHD. And her best friend Hettie can't help her because there's nothing wrong with Hettie. She's perfect. So Gwendolyn is hopeless until she remembers the one thing that helped her mother when her own life was out of control, or actually the 12 things. Can these 12 steps that cured her mother somehow cure Gwendolyn too? So joining us tonight is the author, Caela Carter. She's written 3 books for middle grade readers, One Speck of Truth, My Life with the Liars, and Forever or a Long, Long Time. It sounds like maybe more than that. This might be an older bio. Well, we can talk about that too. She lives in Brooklyn with her family, which means she's actually 3 hours ahead of us. So it's even more amazing that she is talking with you guys tonight because it's late there. So please, everyone, we're going to welcome Caela Carter to talk to us about 54 Things Wrong with Gwendolyn Rogers.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to Roundabout Books and Julie for having me here. It's one of my favorite things is to talk with kiddos who love to read, which I'm assuming is all of you all. And I have been learning about Oregon Battle of the Books, which is such a unique thing. I thought it was similar to what other states do, where the books are competing against each other for what's the best book. But in Oregon, it sounds like the readers are competing against each other for who's like the deepest reader who remembers the most or something. And so that's like, what a cool initiative in terms of getting kids to read and getting kids to read new books. I also really love the selections. I'm not talking about 54 things, but just in general, I love that, these are modern selections that kids are going to be interested in. So it's just very cool. And I would love to hear more about all of your experience with that. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you end up kind of in a trivia competition. Is that right? But the trivia is about these books that you've read. Okay, cool. So that's very cool. So as Julie said, I'm Caela Carter. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I have been writing professionally for about 14 years now. I actually have 6 books for middle grade readers. And my most recent actually came out in March this year, and that is called The World Divided by Piper. Let me grab it off my bookshelf. And actually, in this book, one of the big plot points is that my main character Piper is competing in like an academic trivia competition throughout the whole book. So that's kind of cool. So I've been thinking a lot about like how they work, and it's a very similar statewide. It goes against schools. It's just not about books in particular. Anyway, so I'm super glad to be here. Oregon's one of the few states I've never been to IRL, but it's really fun to be here in spirit and in pages. And I was just going to share kind of a little presentation about this book. Ooh, a unicorn. I love it. And so, as I understand, you all are going to be competing in this, I figure I would like to give everybody sort of an advantage, right? In terms of thinking about the book, maybe in a different way that will help you remember things. Because honestly, I wrote this years ago, and there are some questions I probably wouldn't get 100% on the Gwendolyn Rogers part of the quiz, because I've read some examples. I see how deep this quiz goes, or this competition goes. So, but also, I bet that you're all here because you like or love to read. If that's true, give me a nod. Yeah. And as much as I love the idea of this competition, I hope that in reading, it seems very brain forward, right? You're really reading to like remember everything and remember all the characters' names and all the little facts. And that's not necessarily why people read a book like this one, which is the way I like to read. It's kind of more soul forward, right? It's like, how can I relate to these characters and what does this feel like to read? And so I'm hoping that I have this little tiny presentation here that I'm hoping can both kind of help with remembering the facts and giving connections that will help with that, but also be kind of a soul forward way to look at the book in terms of how does it relate to us as human beings? Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm actually going to start with I'm going to read a little bit because I know it can be fun to hear an author read, and because I'm not sure if you've all read the book already, so I want to have something for us all to talk about. So I'm going to read just a very little bit from the beginning of chapter 4. If you haven't read it yet, all you need to know at this point is similar to or actually exactly what Julie said. Gwendolyn has found her IEP report like years ago, and she was not supposed to read it, but she did anyway. And she took it, and it said all these pretty harsh things about her. And she made a list of everything, every bad quote unquote bad quality it mentioned. And that's what you can see on the front of the book here, right? Like talks too much, picky eater, all those things. They come from this IEP report. And so she turned that into like a physical piece of paper that she goes to bed with every night and reads before she goes to sleep. And also throughout her thinking, she sort of gets these thoughts. They're called intrusive thoughts. They're like thoughts that show up even though you don't want them there, from her list. So she'll be thinking about something and then she'll be like, ooh, I don't want to eat that. And her brain will go to picky eater, right? From her list. And the only other thing you need to know is that Tyler, the character Tyler, is Gwendolyn's half brother. He's her dad's son, but neither Tyler or Gwendolyn really know their dad. And for most of her life, Gwendolyn did not know Tyler, so he's kind of new into her life. So chapter 4, Good Morning, Confidence. I just thought of one more thing you all need to know. And that is that the other thing Gwendolyn does is she personifies her emotions, meaning she turns her emotions into little characters that she names like anger or sadness in her body, and she gives them physical characteristics. So, good morning, confidence. Oh, sorry. And the last thing is, as I read this, I want you to think about, and you can put in the chat, anything you hear when it says 54 things wrong with Gwendolyn Rogers, anything you hear as I'm reading that you think of as a thing of Gwendolyn Rogers, or that you hear her call herself a thing about her, right? Just put it in the chat. So as I read, think about it. And if you hear one, just put them in the chat so we can kind of gather a list and see how we get. Okay? All right. So chapter 4, Good Morning, Confidence. That night, I snuggle into my bed, and my mom comes in and pulls the covers tight. Luckily, she gets the blankets perfectly on the first try. Then she sings Good Night, Sweetheart, kisses me on the forehead, and hands me the book I never read. Don't forget to turn your light out, okay, Cupcake? She asks. I nod and let the warm snuggliness fill me up. 39, immature. Tyler says his mom never tucks him in anymore. He says he goes to bed whenever he feels like it, and sometimes it's before her and sometimes it's after. He sort of laughed when he found out my mom still tucks me in every night, just like he sort of laughed when he saw our too small apartment the first time he came over to hang out on a weekend. But I don't care. Tyler and I are the same, but our moms aren't. He has vacations and Saturday night movies and weekend trips to the creamery at the university with his mom. Some days, bedtime is the only good moment I get with mine. I don't mind that Tyler laughed either, though. For all I know, he actually didn't mean to. Tyler's like me, so sometimes he does things before he even knows he's doing them. Mom leaves my room, and like always, I dig under the blankets and unfold the papers. I do it carefully because some of them are getting so thin I know they could rip easily, if that happened, I'd have to sit and copy the list all over again, both sides. Letters in my handwriting fill my vision. Black ink starts marching across the page. Even though I wrote these words, I always have to focus super hard to read them. I start where I left off last night. 7, inattentive. Because it's a good night, confidence wakes up and steps in to interrupt the list. This is supposed to happen every night, but confidence is a lot harder to wake up than anger or sadness. Confidence is a small stick figure that lives in the sliver between my brain and my skull, right at the top of my forehead. He moves and talks like a little soldier, and he's hunter green, like a military uniform. Whenever my mom comes up with a plan that might actually work, confidence wakes up and marches around declaring things. Not tomorrow, he says, as I read number 7. Tomorrow at attention all day. He about faces in the middle of my brain. 8, acts without thinking. Tomorrow we will think. Long before any action can happen, we will think as soon as our eyes are open. He marches. 9, hyperactive. Tomorrow we will be hypoactive, confidence declares. We will stun the world with how slowly we can act. 10, no filter. That's enough, confidence says. Tomorrow will be different. You can go to bed now. And for once, I listen. I turn out the light. Okay, so I'm going to stop reading there and take a second and look at the chat. So I'll stop sharing for a second and see some of the things we came up with in terms of things about Gwendolyn Rogers. So inattentive, true. Oh, we didn't get very many. Anyone want to add a few more in the chat that you heard her name or that you can kind of figure out this is a thing about Gwendolyn Rogers. This is a thing she would say. Oh, Isaac says forgiving. Interesting. I'll just give it another second. Immature is one of the ones she said. Hyperactive, talks too much. Lexi, that's beautiful. Wow. Okay, so let me share again here. Okay, so what did you hear? So these are the things that Gwendolyn has called herself in this little passage. She has called herself immature, inattentive, acts without thinking, hyperactive, no filter. So in that was about 2 pages I read, and all those thoughts have come into her head of like, this is who I am. This is who I am. But I'm wondering if, and I already saw it in the chat, and we can add more in the chat if you'd like, because I want to keep this as interactive as possible, because I know that helps people remember it. If anybody saw anything else. So what did you hear maybe that is right with Gwendolyn Rogers, right? And so already, I guess I can't do the chat while I'm sharing, so I'll speak for another minute before I check the chat. So if you've heard anything that you feel like that's right with Gwendolyn, add it now. Already, though, I saw that Isaac said forgiving, right? And somebody said she cares about Tyler, right? So what did we hear in those couple pages that's maybe more right with Gwendolyn Rogers? I just figured out how to see the chat. Okay. Why is there a stick man? So that's part of her personifying her emotions, right? So Gwendolyn turns her emotions with her imagination into little creatures. Like anger is this red triangle that she imagines inside herself when she is very angry. So confidence she imagines as a little stick figure marching around her brain. So that's just kind of her imagination. But let's see what else we have here. Good at making up games. That's true. I'm not sure that was in that little passage. Honest. That's right. She is honest, Natalie. And you can see that there. She does have confidence to lean on. And Amelia, you're right. She's trying really hard here. Right. So the reason I'm saying this is because oops, I didn't know that was going to happen. Sorry. A lot of, oh my gosh. A lot of my inspiration to write Gwendolyn comes from knowing not only kids who think like this, but also sometimes grownups who think about kids like this as like a list of things that need fixing, right? And when you think about it, a lot of the stuff that's really great about Gwendolyn is the flip side of the things she considers wrong with herself, right? So somebody said honest, and one of the things on Gwendolyn's list is no filter. And no filter means that Gwendolyn often speaks without thinking, right? And that is a challenge that she just kind of speaks without thinking. Sometimes she offends people. Sometimes she says things she doesn't mean to say. But the flip side of that is that exact quality is part of what makes her honest, right? So if she created a filter, maybe she wouldn't be so honest anymore, right? Her kind of disorganization is maybe that flip side of being able to think up games, right? She doesn't organize the world the way a lot of people organize the world. So she's able to kind of create these games out of her brain. So when I started to think about what I wanted to write for my next book, I was thinking a little bit about myself, which we're going to get into, but I was also thinking about kids I know who have the hardest time with adults, basically. And I really kind of set out with this challenge to myself to write a main character who would be really difficult to like in real life. And in my brain, that's true because Gwendolyn, if you've read the book, you know, Gwendolyn is actually physically aggressive at times, right? She hits other kids even. And I don't think hitting is okay. Of course, hitting is not okay. But I don't think that just because a kid hits somebody, nobody can like that kid anymore. And I don't think that just because a kid hits somebody, that kid deserves to walk around thinking there's 54 things wrong with them and nothing right with them, right? And so I really set out, my challenge to myself was like, can I write a book about the kind of kid who in school maybe nobody would really like, at least like the grownups wouldn't really like, and the kids who don't know her a lot would know her as the kid who's hitting, right? A kid who would be very misunderstood. And can I make my readers like this kid, right? Can I write her in a way where she doesn't get the label that we often hear in publishing, which is unlikable. So you're often told like you can't write an unlikable character, meaning like a character that is hard to like or that nobody would really like. And so I really set out to be like, I'm going to write a physically aggressive kid and make her still very likable. And one of the ways I set out to do this was to really think about the flip side of all of these 54 things. What would make a kid with all of these problems really great? What would make her fantastic? What is the flip side of being disorganized? What is the flip side of being lazy, right? And maybe that's being understanding and forgiving. Tyler, I'm going to check the chat for just a second and see. Oh, more. She needs to think positive things about herself. I agree, Jace. She tries hard. She's creative. Right. So this is another list. A partial, oops. Oh my gosh. I need to get rid of the chat. How do I do that? Okay. Oh my gosh, guys. I'm really sorry. This is a partial list of 54 things wrong. So is this Gwendolyn's list? Is this from Gwendolyn's list? People have cameras on, I see some shaking heads and some nodding. Feel free to vote in the chat. See, no, sure, nope, some are not. Yes. Yeah. That makes sense because no, this is not from Gwendolyn's list. But it is similar. This is a partial list of 54 or however many things wrong with me. So when I was growing up, and that's a picture of me as a 6-year-old, which is when my problems in school really started. I was not like Gwendolyn in that I don't think I ever hit a kid. That I didn't really get angry out loud. I got very angry at myself, but I really struggled in school. And even though actually in the end, I kind of did well in school, but it never felt like I was doing well. And I really, really struggled with kind of basic things. And if you look back at this list, these are all things that were actually said and written down about me while I was in school. Constantly, and not in ways that were hidden like they were from Gwendolyn. Like I had teachers writing careless on my math tests because I had copied the numbers incorrectly. So like if you're doing long division, right? I had, how you do a lot of copying. I had copied the numbers incorrectly, so I was called careless. But really, copying numbers is very hard for me because there's something in my brain called dyslexia, and I see things in a little bit out of order. And so I wasn't being careless by copying these numbers wrong. In fact, I really cared a lot, right? Somebody who's careless doesn't cry when they're called careless because they haven't spent an hour just to be called careless on one, long division problem. So I was called careless. I was called forgetful. I was called spacey. I was actually called spacey in my school yearbook, right? And all of these were really hard to live with when I was a kid. And yet now I think of them as the flip side of the stuff I love about myself and the stuff I love to live with. And so this book, I have written 6 books. None of the rest of them are that personal to my life. This one really is personal to the way that I had to grow up also. It's funny because when I set out to write the book, I was thinking about this physically aggressive kid, and I didn't realize it was going to turn this personal. But in the researching of this book, I started to realize that I have some not disorganized, I shouldn't say that. I have some neurodivergent things about my own brain. And it was in the writing of this book that I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD because I set out to write the book and learned so much about it. So I see there's a lot in the chat. I think there will be time for questions, and I'll make sure to look at comments too. But that's just a little bit about why I wrote it. And also, I also don't think that this experience of being surrounded by adults who don't understand you is unique to kids who are neurodiverse, like Gwendolyn. Certainly any of us who are neurodiverse go through it. But I also think all kids have this experience where adults have completely misunderstood them, or where they're being told something that doesn't make sense in kid world and only makes sense in adult world. And they have to live with that. And they're being labeled with words that don't actually fit because they're being looked at by adult eyes. And of course, I'm talking to you kids, right? I see that in you. And that's where this book is coming from. Because kids think differently and prioritize differently, but have to live according to adult rules. And so, one way to think of all this is that these are a billion things that are wrong, or were wrong, or are wrong. They're all still true with me, right? But the other way is to think that actually, this is about an impartial list of 54 things that were wrong with the people around me, the adults around me, right? So maybe instead of me being disorganized, it was wrong of the adults around me to call me disorganized without teaching me how to organize my backpack first, right? And that's the first one, assuming kids know skills instead of teaching them, teasing kids with sarcasm, thinking consequence will teach lessons instead of actually teaching those lessons, right? So thinking that writing careless on my test is going to teach me to copy numbers better, right? That was never, ever going to work. That was a consequence that was never going to teach the lesson. Um, Being inflexible because it makes adults' lives easier is a thing that happens in this book a lot. If you've read it, you know about Mr. Olson and the pencil, right? And how Mr. Olson will not let Gwendolyn just keep a pencil in the classroom, even though she forgets her pencil every single day. And he says it's for her own good. And this is something that gets me so upset because it's not for her own good. And this is what I mean. I think all of us as children and all kids here in Oregon and everywhere else have the experience of an adult looking at you and saying, this is for your own good, when it's actually to make the adult's life easier and not for your own good. So I really wanted to kind of bring that out in the book. And that's the human piece that I'm hoping kind of can reach across to all kids who are living in that experience. And so I would encourage you to think about writing a list of 54 things right with you, right? 54 things right about you, or 54 things right with a friend of yours. And that can be a good end to the reading of this book, is to start to think about, well, what are 54 things right, right? And if you get stuck on, but there's so many things wrong, often the things right are the same. They're the same thing, right? The way that Gwendolyn thinks is so unpredictable to people that they don't notice how forgiving she is. They don't notice how perceptive she is of other people's feelings, right? And being forgiving and perceptive of other people's feelings, well, first of all, I think being forgiving goes hand in hand with being messy, in my opinion, because if you're messy, you constantly have to forgive yourself for losing everything all the time. You're used to forgiving, so you're going to forgive other people too. So I think those things can really go hand in hand. So as you finish the book, or when we finish tonight, this would be something I encourage you to do, is to think about, like, because you like all of us probably have a running list in your head, even if you didn't, and I hope you didn't write it down and read it every night. But if you have that list in your head, I encourage you to write down the other one, right? The list of things that are right. And that is my little presentation. So I will stop sharing now, and thank you all. And oh my goodness, this chat has been blowing up. I love it.
Yeah, I think you got a lot of feelings going with some of our listeners tonight. And I saw a comment back that says you don't get bullied a lot at school. I love that. That is how it absolutely should be for everyone, everywhere, your whole life. We also know sometimes that you might come into a situation where someone is going to say something that kind of hits that part of you that you already are upset that you do. Or I personally am always worried about interrupting people, because when I get very excited about something we're talking about, I forget and I just want to say whatever is in my brain out loud. So I also love that this is something that could happen for everyone their whole life. And you just remind yourself that it's because you're passionate or creative, or maybe you cry when someone tells you bad news because you're really sensitive and you love that person. And it's not a bad thing. I would love to hear some questions and comments from our viewers tonight. So I know you all know Zoom very well. If you want to type it in the chat, you're welcome to. If you would like to ask it out loud, use the raise hand function so that I can kind of keep track, and then you can unmute and ask your question. But I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you've already read the book, if you had a question about something that happened in the book, a character, a scene. The pencil thing really got to me too, because I stash things around our store now so that I don't forget where my pens are.
Julie,
And
I
that's
wanted to add to the comment about not getting bullied, which thank goodness. I'm so glad. And I just wanted to add that I actually thought a lot about that. And there actually is not a lot, if any, bullying in terms of peer bullying in this book. Because I do think in general, kids get it. And when kids bully, they're often kind of given permission or modeling from the adults around them to
yeah.
bully. Right. So I can see that even if you're not getting bullied at school, which thank goodness, that doesn't mean that the adults around you are respecting you the way, and I hope they are. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it doesn't mean necessarily that the adults around you are respecting you as as a kid, as somebody whose brain is just as valid as theirs. Um, the way that the way, the way that they should. So
So I see Kennedy has a hand raised, so we would love it if you unmuted and asked your questions.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm wondering if non-binary was a thing when you were little. Because my mom, that when she was little, non-binary wasn't a thing, so I was wondering how you thought how the non-binary friend was based off of a real person.
thank you, Hannah. That's a great question. I mean, there have always been non-binary people, but they haven't always been able to talk about it the same way. Kind of right now, there's some places it's more safe to be non-binary and more safe to be open about being non-binary than others. There have been times in history when sometimes it's been more safe to talk about being non-binary, and sometimes it's been less safe. And there's also kind of different language that has been used to mean the same thing, to mean what we now say as non-binary. But to answer the other part of your question, Marty and all the characters, nobody's based on anybody specific, because I don't do that. But Marty is something that really impresses me about kids who are trans or non-binary, or who are just, or even cisgender, but just very sure about it so young, is that I did grow up similar to Gwendolyn in that I really wanted to know what was happening with my brain. I felt like somebody needed to tell me, a doctor needed to tell me, my parents needed to tell me, why is school so hard? Why is life so hard? Somebody needed to tell me. And so when I see a young person who is so sure who they are, that they're able to tell the rest of the world, you're wrong, I'm not what you think I am, I'm this other thing, that really impresses me. And I was really interested in putting kind of that like confidence that Marty would have in who they are against kind of Gwendolyn's search for somebody to tell her who she is. And I thought like they would really bond. I also thought it was a really clear way to show one of Gwendolyn's strengths, that Gwendolyn would not hesitate to accept Marty for who Marty says they are, right? So that almost everybody else will have questions and like, how can that be? But because Gwendolyn is so disorganized, she's also very easily thinks outside the box. So something like that is very easy for her to accept. And I wanted to have like a clear indication of a strength that she would have, not in spite of her neurodivergence, but like because of it, right? So that was a really good question. Thank you.
So there's a couple questions in the chat, and then we'll get to our person with the raised hand. But we have, how did you think of the nickname Cupcake?
Oh, I don't remember. As I said, I wrote this a very long time ago. This is more in like kind of the writing tips section of life, or of what I talk about. But one thing I do in terms of just kind of creating voice when I'm writing is that I will have all of the, or many of the kind of secondary characters call my main character something else. It helps me distinguish their voices. So I do usually try to come up early on with like, if a parent's going to be, well, parents are central in all my books. So I usually want to think early on, what does the parent, sure, her name is Gwendolyn, but what does the parent actually call her? There is a cupcake shop called Gwendolyn Rogers Cupcakes, I think, but I didn't know that. So that's not why, that's not why, that's the nickname.
All right, the other one we're going to get out of the chat before we turn to our raised hand, which is a very wonderful question. I'm wondering if maybe a parent helped with some of the phrasing of this. What do you wish a supportive adult would have told you when you were Gwendolyn's age?
I think, I think that I wish somebody told me that it wasn't my responsibility to make myself able to fit into a classroom, and that the classroom should be changing for me as much as I needed to change for the classroom. So I wish somebody had framed what was going on with my brain, which I was in this situation where everybody said nothing was happening with my brain. So this is a big difference. But I wish somebody had said, you're right, you are thinking differently than everybody around you. But that isn't because there's something wrong with you. That's because there's what we call an environment person mismatch, right?
Mhm.
So if we think about, you know, people in wheelchairs, right? And if we think about like, if everybody's in a wheelchair except you, except me, the whole world would not work for me, right? Every counter would be too low. Every sink would be too low. Every, you know, the ramps wouldn't work the same way. Everything would not work anymore. So it's not actually that there's something wrong with wheelchairs. It's just like this environment person mismatch. And that's what I wish an adult had told me, that, yeah, that I deserve to take up space and that the classroom should be changing for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. So our first raised hand is actually named Gwendolyn. So I would love to hear your question or comment. Go ahead and unmute.
How did you come up with all the names of the games that she came up with?
I think a lot, you mean like spoons and ultimate spoons and ultimate spoons?
Yeah.
Okay. Spoons is a real game. So I didn't come up with the name Spoons. Do you all play Spoons anymore? Is it that old?
Might be.
Oh. Okay. It also might be like Midwestern, at like a Midwestern regional thing. But anyway, so Spoons, so a lot of them are real games, or at least games I have played, and then I just added ultimate to, if that makes sense. I wish I had a better answer for that, but yeah, bubblegum is a game. Oh, good. Some people play Spoons.
I know bubblegum.
All right. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Gwendolyn.
Okay. So Kennedy, I saw in the chat that we might have more than one question. So let's just start and see which questions you have. Go ahead and unmute.
So we have a third grader, we have a fourth grader, which is me, and then a fifth grader, that is Nick.
Awesome.
My name is Kennedy. and the book 54 Things Wrong with Gwendolyn Rogers really inspired me. And I am non-binary myself, and it really inspired me, like kind of a way to kind of express myself.
I'm so glad to hear that, Kennedy. You're gonna make me cry. I'm so glad to hear that.
Thank you for being here tonight too,
Thank
Kennedy.
you.
That's
Thank
so
you.
awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing
right.
that.
What are our other, do you have other comments from your room tonight or just the one?
Thank you. Do you have a comment?
I love how you were able to think of like all the things, like it was kind of like just describing like the whole long list. It was kind of just everything that people have spread out that's wrong with like everyone. It happens to everyone. Everyone has things wrong with them. It's not something that is that is like necessarily for one person. So I was asking what qualities that all the other characters, like how did the book not include their qualities? Like in Gwendolyn's sight, everyone that wasn't her was perfect.
Yeah, Gwendolyn thinks everybody's perfect who's not her. Yeah. But I hope it did. I guess Gwendolyn sort of still thinks that by the end of the book, that everybody's perfect except her. I think that's a good point. I don't know if I caught your name, but I think that's a good point.
Oh, my name's Hank.
Hank. Okay. Thank you, Hank. I think that's a good point. That she doesn't quite get all the way, right? Gwendolyn, to like seeing the world a different way. I think she will. I hope the reader can see that, that Hettie isn't perfect. That Marty and Thais certainly aren't perfect because they've gone years not talking to Gwendolyn for no reason, right? They all just stopped talking out of a big misunderstanding. So everybody's really misunderstood each other. But I do think that Gwendolyn, like a lot of kids who have ADHD or something similar, I know this is true for me. I feel so far away from perfect. Perfect feels like, or whatever if I'm given directions, they feel so impossible to me that I don't really understand the gradation of like, I just made a little mistake versus I did everything wrong versus whatever. So to me, the world does kind of look like perfect or nothing a lot of the time. And I have to really stop and think that through. And so I did want to kind of pass that on to Gwendolyn because I think a lot of kids think that way. And that a lot of times the kids that are making the most mistakes are actually the ones who are trying hardest to be totally perfect. Because it's hard for them to see like, okay, Hettie doesn't have ADHD. Hettie does great in school, but she's still not perfect, right? There's all these other kind of little things that aren't getting in her life the same way, but but she's not perfect. So yeah, I hope that answers, Hank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we've got a couple more raised hands. So I see one from Heather. Let's go ahead and get your question.
Hi, my name's Audrey, and I have a question. What inspired you to be an author?
That's a really good question, Audrey. I don't have a great answer because I don't remember ever not wanting to be an author. So I'm one of those lucky people. I guess I just always loved books and telling stories. And it didn't happen for me immediately or anything like that. It took me a long time to kind of believe in myself and go for it. But I've wanted to be an author since before I knew how to read. So yeah, so I don't remember.
All right, thank you so much for that question. All right, we've got another raised hand from Lisa. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
I have two questions. My first question is, when did you read the book? And my second question is, what's your favorite part in the book?
Oh my gosh. that second question is going to be a doozy. I wrote the book in 2020 when the world was shut down. That's just kind of what happened with this book. And I actually had to write it very quickly because I was expecting the due date for it to get pushed back, and just kind of threw myself into, kids, homeschooling, whatever. Anyway, so that's when I wrote the book. Gosh, favorite part. I mean, I do really like the connection between Marty and Gwendolyn. That is, in terms of like a kind of a minor favorite part. That's that was probably the most fun to write and to think about, how those two characters would find each other again and connect. But I've never been asked the favorite part of one of my books. So thank you for that challenge.
All right. I do see we've got one more raised hand, and correct me if I say your name wrong, but Yvonne, if you want to unmute, you can ask your question.
How much time did it take to write the book?
That is a really good question. How much time did it take to write the book? So I never really know how to answer this, because there's a lot of different, there's like how much time did it take from the first word to the last word, just the first time I wrote it, right? Then there's all the times I revised it, because I change and change and change and change it. And then I send it to my editor and she makes changes, and then I have to make her changes. And then she says, da, 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 da. So like the whole process of a book is like a year to a year and a half. For this one, I wrote the first draft in like 6 weeks, but that was insane. Again, that was because it was 2020 and things shut down. Usually it takes me about 6 months to write a first draft. But then when I say it takes a year to a year and a half, I know that sounds so long when you've only lived through 8 years, right? Or 9 years or whatever. But a lot of that is, I'm not actively working on the book. I'm just waiting for it to come back, right? So my editor will have it for, 3 months, and then she'll send it back to me and be like, I need these edits in 2 weeks. And then, and then I'm in it again. So it's not as clear an answer as it was when I was a kid, how long it takes to write something, because there's a lot of people involved and there's a lot of waiting involved.
All right. So I see someone who's raising their hand on their video, and the name says the Laughlins. So if you want to unmute and ask your question real quick, and then we'll do Jace. So Jace, if you can just wait a second. All right. I see a hand raised. You had the unicorn filter earlier. Okay, you can ask your question. I think if you hit the space bar, it'll unmute. There you go.
I forgot.
We can come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Jace, why don't you do your question?
What inspired you to write 55 with Gwendolyn Rogers?
What inspired this particular book?
Yeah.
Great question. Mostly it's what I talked about in the presentation. I was inspired to write a book where a kid is really chronically frustrated, really difficult for the adults around them, and really show the world that it was the adults around them that was the problem. That was my real big goal. I also have, in many capacities, I've been a teacher and I've had a lot of other roles, and I've loved a lot of kids who struggle with big behaviors that most people really just don't want anything to do with, like hitting and being physically aggressive and stuff. And so I really wanted to get inside. A lot of times people say, write what you know. I like the phrase, write what you want to know. So I really wanted to kind of get inside that brain that kind of acts the emotions out, which is the opposite of what I did, which was just suck them all in and think about what it would feel like to be inside that brain and body. And yeah, so that's really what inspired this particular book.
Awesome.
question.
All right, I see a hand raised from Amelia. So if you want to ask your question.
Hi, I'm a school librarian, and I am interested in what some of your other favorite, what your favorite middle grade books might be, especially if kids like this one. What other books might you recommend to kids?
Always freeze at this question. Fish in a Tree, for sure. I think that's what it's called. Which gosh, I can't, what is her name? Linda
Malali
Malali, thank you.
or Hunt.
That one, I have ADHD and dyslexia. That one was really cool for me to read, even as an adult, to think about dyslexia in that way. And I know there are a million that are very good, but I don't.
You mentioned one to me before we started.
Oh, yes, Sally Plaw, especially The Fire, the Water, and Maudie McGinn. That is more recent. That book just came out this year. So I haven't thought of it in this context, but that's another really good book about a neurodivergent character and being misunderstood in a similar way. So
If anybody wants to see, that's the cover.
that's another one. Thank you for that, Julie.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to definitely have to check that one out. Thank you so much for that question, Amelia. It looks like our friend, the Laughlins, did you remember your question? Okay, go ahead and unmute and ask.
When did it first go into OBOB?
I think this is the first year it's been on OBOB, isn't it, Caela? Do you know?
Oh, this book? Oh, yes, this is the first I've heard of OBOB, so I doubt it's ever been in there before. Yeah.
They try not to repeat books too close to each other simply because they want to do variety. They will occasionally repeat a book that's maybe like a classic, like that's pretty old, like The Diary of Anne Frank or something like that. But yeah, they try and keep them. And then what did you say? It was the fish? Somebody asked me in the chat for the name of the. Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm helping some people out with in the chat. The Fish in a Tree. There it is.
Just Fish in a Tree.
Okay, Fish in a Tree. And it looks like we have one more raised hand. It says KW's iPhone. So if you want to unmute, you can ask your question, and that'll probably be our last one.
So this book really connected to me because just the character is very similar. And also my mom wanted to know, I wanted to ask
oh, you want me to ask something? Yeah. Okay, I don't really have a question. I have a comment. I really thought this book was wonderful. Thank you for writing it. I had a hard time with the mother in the book because sometimes I was like, she's not being understanding enough, but then it really made me think about how I react in a lot of situations. So anything else you want to say?
Thank you for that.
Thank you for
that mother is, it's interesting. I like her, but I get that people don't. I really wanted to stress how, back to, was it Hank? Somebody talking about the way Gwendolyn sees everybody as perfect. She's able to see her mom as somewhere between perfect and what she is, right? She's like the one person that she can see in between. And I really wanted to stress how, how hard she's trying and how small the resources are for a family like this. I think, when she's a single mom, she's like, her income is keeping them both alive, and the actual childcare problems are getting in the way constantly of, you have to come pick your kid up now and you can't go to work and all that. So, Yeah, and she's in recovery, right? So I wanted to like make her a real person. Maybe I made her a little bit too flawed in that, because I wanted to get the sense that like she's trying, she just doesn't have the resources. So yeah, but versus Mr. Olson, right, who like could be doing better. Yeah. But thank you for that comment.
It also, I think, illustrates sometimes that the person that's closest to you can still misunderstand you the most, because a mother-daughter, I mean, a mom and any child really, that's quite the connection. But if you're not speaking the same language, you're not, the part that I kind of left off today at lunch was after she throws the computer at Power Kids and her mom is asking a question and she goes, I am trying to answer you if you would let me or ask me the question that I can answer. And it's just like, the language barrier of what they don't know how to say to each other is, yeah. We've got a couple of comments. If you haven't seen them, I just want to point them out. As a mom of a of 3 3rd through 5th OBOB kids this year, I'm so grateful this book is on the reading list. It made our lives so much better. So many road trip and dinner conversations we have had about your book. Okay, I might cry. And Amelia says, I think every teacher should read this book. Thank you for writing it. I recommend it all the times to parents and teachers. And I mentioned this before everyone got on, that as a bookseller, I love being able to tell a parent, if your kid is reading this for OBOB, you should be reading it too. And just as an adult who now also has ADHD or has been diagnosed with ADHD, seeing these characters finally be represented, or kids with anxiety and OCD, if it's not on OBOB this year, but Rob Harrell, who has been on before and we love, just wrote a new book called Popcorn, which is about anxiety, and it's beautiful. And if you are struggling with anxiety, you have a kid with it, like, I just love that book. I am so excited, Caela, to recommend this book to so many more people in our store. And I just hope everybody else does that too. So thank you again, everyone. Please say your thanks in the chat, and whatever, for Caela to take the time out of her schedule and talk with us about such an amazing book. And I hope everyone has so much fun this year at OBOB. Just remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to enjoy what you're reading.
Yes.
It's the best. And I'm sure I will see more of you in the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned, we've got 3 more 3rd through 5th, and then 1 high school book to round out the season of fall into OBOB. So I'm sure I will see you. Yes, Jace, next week is the Mistwick School for Music Craft. So we're really excited about that one. So everybody have a great night. Don't forget this will be on YouTube, and just make sure you're supporting your local indie bookstore.
Thank you, everybody. This is so cool. And as you read all these books for OBOB, just remember, you won, right? Like if you're reading half the books on that list, that is a lot of reading, and the competition's really fun and cool, but like that, your brains and hearts are getting bigger just from the reading. So that's really cool.
Absolutely.
Great.
All right, everyone, have a great night, and also great Halloween if you celebrate it. Stay safe. All right.